I watched my house collapse in real time while I wasn't even in the same county. That's the kind of sentence that makes people blink twice, like I'm setting up a punchline. But there was no laugh track that morning. Just the snarl of diesel engines, the crash of splintering beams, and the sound of neighbors' coffee cups clinking politely as they pretended not to see. The HOA president, Linda Pearl's heels, hair lacquered to immovable perfection, stood with her arms folded like she was supervising a flowerbed installation instead of orchestrating a demolition. She called it routine compliance. I called it a bulldozer eating my mortgage. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that my drone and old model I'd been too lazy to pack away was still circling above the property, streaming everything in crisp HD. And that stream? It wasn't just saving to a memory card. It was broadcasting straight to the county's emergency monitoring feed, thanks to a test program I'd signed up for months back. In other words, Linda was starring in her own self-produced crime documentary, and the opening credits had just rolled. Now, rewind 48 hours. I was out of town for a work trip, the kind that leaves you in a forgettable hotel where the coffee tastes like melted cardboard. I figured a few days away would mean peace from the HOA circus. Wrong. At exactly 6:13 a.m. the first morning, my phone lit up with an HOA violation notice. Subject line, unapproved exterior structure. No body text, no photo, just a link to the bylaws PDF I'd memorized by now like bad scripture. Article 7, Section C. All sheds, gazebos, and auxiliary buildings must be pre-approved. Except, I didn't have a shed, or a gazebo, or anything resembling an auxiliary building, unless Linda had decided my mailbox was an illegal high-rise. I emailed back, politely at first. Could you clarify what this is regarding? No answer. Then I called, straight to voicemail, the kind with that fake friendly tone that makes you feel like you've already lost. By the second morning, a new email arrived. This one was bolder. Final notice of non-compliance. Final notice. As if 2 days and zero dialogue was all the due process required to condemn a man's home. Attached was a permit packet, stamped and signed, but even through the grainy scan, I could tell half the dates didn't match. My stomach dropped. That's when the texts from neighbors started rolling in. Do you know what's happening on your lawn? There's a truck outside, big one. And then, my favorite. Linda says you signed off on this? I threw open my laptop and pulled up the drone feed, mostly out of morbid curiosity. What I saw froze me. A yellow bulldozer parked on my grass, its bucket already nudging the siding like a cat testing the edge of a glass. 2 workers leaned on shovels, smoking, and Linda, in her pressed blazer, flipping through a clipboard with all the gravitas of a general surveying the battlefield. Routine compliance, she told one of the crew members, loud enough the drone's mic caught it. Owners aware. Counties approved. Aware? Approved? I nearly choked on the hotel's complimentary muffin. Neighbors lined the sidewalks like it was Saturday morning entertainment. Some filmed on their phones, others whispered behind hands. But no one intervened. Because in HOA land, Linda wasn't just president, she was queen, and questioning her was social suicide. The first hit of the bucket shattered a window. The second buckled siding. Drywall dust bloomed into the air, floating across the street until it mixed with the smell of someone's bacon frying. I sat there in a stiff hotel chair, watching my life's biggest investment reduced to rubble in pixelated frames. And then came the twist. The notification on my drone app. Live emergency feed active. Transmitting to county response. I'd forgotten all about enrolling in the trial program that linked civilian drones to local emergency services. It was meant for wildfires and accidents, not HOA war crimes. But here it was, broadcasting Linda's smug profile and forged paperwork to half a dozen government laptops downtown. I couldn't do much from that hotel room yet, but I knew, in that instant, the tide had turned. Linda thought she was conducting a private execution. Instead, She was starring in a live broadcast with police commentary running in the margins. The demolition continued for another hour. By the time I called the sheriff's office myself, they'd already been alerted to unusual activity. Unusual activity. Now, that's what they called a bulldozer ripping through drywall like a piñata. And still, I couldn't look away. My drone's battery finally gave out, the feed cutting to black with one last glimpse of Linda's heels planted firmly in the rubble. When I packed my bag to head home, I wasn't just furious, I was rehearsing. Every line I'd throw at her, every receipt I'd slap down, every neighbor I'd call as witness. But I also knew Linda wasn't done. She never was, because as much as the house lay broken, she still had her binder. And Linda always had another rule, another clause, another lie tucked neatly behind those glossy tabs. I pulled onto the interstate, the hotel shrinking in my rear view, heart pounding harder with every mile closer to home. Somewhere ahead, Linda was already crafting her next move. And I had no idea that the real battle, the one that would turn the entire neighborhood against her, was only hours away. Show me the bylaw that says a mailbox counts as a guest house. That was the line that cracked the room. A couple of neighbors actually snorted. One stifled a laugh behind her hand. Linda didn't flinch. She just tightened her grip on the oversized binder in front of her, pearls catching the light as if they were stage props. Her nails tapped the laminated tabs like a judge's gavel, her eyes daring anyone to challenge her authority. This was her theater, and she'd been rehearsing for years. But now the audience wasn't applauding. They were murmuring, and I'd come prepared with more than sarcasm had evidence. The HOA clubhouse always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and Lysol wipes, the kind of sterile odor that makes you feel like you're waiting for a root canal. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow tint on everything. Metal folding chairs squeaked as neighbors shifted uncomfortably, all of us seated around those long plastic tables that bow in the middle if you set anything heavier than a casserole dish on them. Linda stood at the front, commanding the room like a substitute teacher who'd been handed a whistle and thought she was a principal. She slapped the binder open with a theatrical flourish. Article 7, Section C, she read aloud, her voice high and precise, clearly states that all exterior structures require prior approval from this board. She turned a page. Section D, any unapproved modifications are subject to removal at the homeowner's expense. Another page. Section E. I cut her off. Linda, my siding wasn't an exterior modification. It was my house. You don't get to bulldoze a house. Her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. Non-compliance, once established, is not optional. The board exercised its authority. Authority? She loved that word. She wielded it like a shield, as if stamping it on a forged document made it law. The neighbors shifted again, whispering now. I caught fragments. Didn't he? But the permits. Is that even legal? Linda's pearls caught another flicker of fluorescent glare as she leaned forward. The decision was unanimous. I stood, pulling a folder from my backpack. Funny you should mention votes, because according to these minutes you never called one, and according to these receipts you funneled HOA landscaping funds into equipment rental, equipment that looks a lot like a bulldozer parked in my driveway last week. A ripple went through the room. Someone muttered, "She didn't." Linda's hand froze mid-page turn. For a second, just a second, her expression cracked like a fissure in concrete. But she recovered quickly, tapping her binder again. Unanimous doesn't always mean recorded. Some things are handled off the record. I let that hang there. The room shifted again. Off the record. Neighbors who'd always kept quiet, too afraid of late-night violation slips, were starting to realize just how much she'd been manufacturing. Let's go back to Article 7, I said, pulling out a printed copy of the bylaws, highlighted within an inch of its life. Structures, fences, gazebos. Nowhere does it say siding, windows, or main residences. And I have emails from you, Linda, threatening me with fines unless I repainted my door. You remember that? October Your justification then was Article 11, mailbox aesthetics. Someone snorted again. This time it was louder. Her binder, once a symbol of untouchable order, now looked like a prop in a bad community theater play. She flipped frantically, pages smacking like wet towels, but the magic was gone. The neighbors were leaning forward, their eyes sharp. I laid down my final card, a USB stick. Drone footage, audio included. Every word you said to the demolition crew, every excuse. And yes, it's already been submitted to the county. Linda's knuckles went white on the edge of the binder. She didn't snatch the USB. She didn't look at it at all. She just stood there, pearls gleaming, jaw tight. One of the board members, a quiet man named Greg who usually spent meetings staring at his shoes, finally spoke. "Linda, did you forge the permit packet?" The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. Linda didn't answer. She just closed the binder slowly, as if shutting it could erase the question. I leaned back, letting the moment breathe. For once, I wasn't the one under the fluorescent spotlight. She was. But before I could push further, the clubhouse door creaked open. A deputy sheriff stepped inside, hat tucked under his arm. His eyes swept the room, landing on the binder, the neighbors, then finally on me. "We're here about a demolition complaint," he said. "Need to ask a few questions." Every head turned toward Linda. Her pearls gleamed, but her face stayed stone. And I knew this wasn't the climax. This was just the opening act of her unraveling. "These permits aren't just invalid, Linda, they're forged." That was the line that dropped like a brick in the emergency board meeting. The air went dead silent. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights seemed to hold their breath. Linda, standing at the front with her pearl necklace gleaming like it had its own spotlight, froze mid-smile. She'd walked in expecting applause, maybe even a standing ovation, binder tucked under her arm like a holy text. Instead, she was staring at two county officials, a deputy sheriff, and a half-circle of neighbors who were no longer in awe. They were circling. The meeting had been called for 7 p.m. sharp in the HOA clubhouse, but by 6:30 the parking lot was full. Pickup trucks, minivans, even a county vehicle with its emblem stenciled on the door. Inside, the usual spread of stale cookies and styrofoam cups of lukewarm coffee sat untouched. People weren't here to snack. They were here to watch blood in the water. Linda strode in last, heels clicking like a gavel on tile. She didn't scan the room, she owned it, or so she thought. The binder hit the table with a thud, her signature move, and she straightened her blazer as if preparing to deliver a sermon. "Thank you all for assembling on short notice," she began, her voice smooth as glass. "There's been some unfortunate confusion about last week's compliance action, but rest assured the board operated well within its rights." That's when the county inspector cleared his throat. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a stack of papers in his hand, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mrs. Hendricks, we've reviewed the demolition packet you submitted. The permits listed are not only expired, they appear to have been altered. Signatures don't match. Dates don't align. Can you explain this?" The room tilted. You could feel the shift. Linda blinked once, twice, then flipped open her binder like it might sprout wings and fly her out of danger. "These permits were provided to me by our legal counsel." "Funny," I cut in, sliding a printed email across the table. "Because I called your attorney's office. They had no record of issuing them. What they did have was a very colorful voicemail from you demanding they stay out of HOA matters. Want me to play it?" Whispers rippled through the neighbors. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Linda's pearls glinted as she stiffened. "This is highly irregular. We don't need outsiders meddling in internal affairs." The deputy sheriff leaned forward. His badge caught the fluorescent glow, and the leather of his belt creaked as he rested his hand casually near his holster. "Forging county documents isn't an internal affair, ma'am. It's a criminal one." For once, Linda had no immediate comeback. She licked her lips, flipped a random tab in her binder, and launched into bylaws like incantations. Article 9. Section A clearly grants the board authority to enforce. I raised my phone, thumb hovering over the play button. Drone footage, clear as day. You told the demolition crew the owner approved it. You told them the county approved it. Both lies. Care to deny it before we watch the replay? Her eyes darted around the room, searching for loyalty. But the board members she once cowed into silence weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me, at the inspector, at the deputy. One by one, they shifted in their seats, like jurors realizing they'd been conned. Greg, the soft-spoken treasurer, finally lifted his head. "Linda, you told us this was unanimous. You told us the county insisted. Was any of that true?" The silence was heavier than drywall dust. Linda closed the binder slowly, as though shutting it would rewrite reality. "The community demanded order," she said finally, her voice brittle. "Sometimes leadership requires interpretation." "Interpretation," I echoed. "You bulldozed a man's home because you didn't like his paint color. That's not leadership. That's ego with a pearl necklace." That broke the dam. A neighbor chuckled. Another clapped once, sharply, like punctuation. Soon the room was alive with murmurs, a tide turning against its self-appointed queen. The inspector stacked his papers neatly. "Mrs. Hendricks will be conducting a full audit of HOA funds. Initial review shows discrepancies payments to equipment rental companies, misclassified as landscaping." Linda's face drained of color. The deputy stepped forward, voice calm but final. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us." Handcuffs clicked open, metal catching the light. For a split second, Linda looked almost human small, vulnerable, stripped of the authority she'd wrapped herself in like armor. Then she straightened, pearls still gleaming, and extended her wrists with all the dignity of a dethroned monarch. The neighbors who had once tiptoed around her tyranny began to clap. It started tentative, then grew louder, until the fluorescent-lit clubhouse echoed like a stadium. Applause, laughter, even a few whistles. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt unfinished. Because as the deputy led Linda past the rows of folding chairs, her eyes locked on mine. Not with defeat, with promise. A cold, deliberate promise that this wasn't over. And as the door shut behind her, I couldn't shake the chill that spread through the room. The queen was toppled, but queens have allies, and Linda had built an empire on fear. The board might have turned. The county might be digging through her files. But I had a sinking feeling the real war was only just beginning.